Hi everybody. Excuse me, losing my voice. It's so hot here in Maine. It's been well into the high 90s for like 3 or 4 days. Got the air conditioner right there, but I don't want to turn it on because it makes so much noise. But welcome to Tea Tuesday. I like to thank Life with Patty and Kathy's Favorite Things for hosting this open collab. It is an open collab. Yes, anybody can join. It can be formal tea, informal tea. It can be cold tea, hot tea, or a beverage of your choice. I'll put everything down in the description box, plus the hashtag. We'd love to have you. Go on over and see what the other gals and gents are doing for Tea Tuesday. And it's a lot of fun. Join in, please. You can do whatever you want. You can just sit here and chat. You can color. You can do a craft. I was going to make a gnome today, but everybody likes Mr. Twiddle. So I guess Mr. Twiddle wins out. So everything will be in the description box below. And I just picked up a grocery order at Walmart on a pickup. So I said, gonna go home, do Tea Tuesday. I've got a vanilla chai. Not good for my diet. But boy, is it good for me. I love it. So anyways, let's get started. Hello, Mr. Twiddle. We are in chapter 5. Let's see what he's going to get into this week. Mr. Twiddle makes a muddle. A muddle? I love how they talk. Once upon a time, Mrs. Twiddle got very tired of having Mr. Twiddle in the house. How many women and gents can say that? I can. Mr. Twiddle, for goodness sakes, go out into the garden and do some work, she cried. Do you know what you've been doing all morning? You've been trying to smoke your fountain pen, and you've put your pipe into the ink stand. And is it you who has stood the poker in the hall stand and put your umbrella in the fender? Oh, Mr. Twiddle, what must we do with him? Oh dear, said Mr. Twiddle, taking his fountain pen out of his mouth and staring at it. I thought my pipe tasted a bit funny today. I'll go out and do a bit of gardening, Mrs. Twiddle. You better, before you start to poke the fire with your umbrella, said Mrs. Twiddle. Your best one, too. Really? Twiddle, why don't you use your brains? Mr. Twiddle could hear by the way that his wife talked that she was not very good-tempered, so he quickly went into the hall, put on his boots, tied his old scarf around his neck, and ran out the door. It was cold. What should he do? He poked his head into the shed. It was dark there, but he could see something piled in a corner. Bless us all, said Mr. Twiddle, staring. I believe those are daffodil bulbs we've forgotten to plant. Dear, what would Mrs. Twiddle say if she knew all those were sprouting away there in the corner instead of growing into a nice yellow daffodil for the spring? Now it would be a good thing if I planted them all. That would keep me busy all the morning. So he took his spade and he set to work. He dug up the bed and then fetched the bulbs into his barrel. He set them all in a nice row and covered them up gently with earth. Oh, he could work well when he liked. Could Mr. Twiddle? He quite enjoyed himself, for the morning was fine. Well, good for Mr. Twiddle. He planted every single bulb, and then he heard his wife calling him. You seem to be working very hard, Mr. Twiddle. I suppose you'll be hungry for dinner. Would you like a nice stew with carrots and onions and turnip? I do. Sounds good. Ooh, yes, said Mr. Twiddle, feeling quite hungry at the thought. Well, fetch me a few carrots, one large turnip, and some onions from the shed, called Mrs. Twiddle. So Mr. Twiddle went to the shed and looked around. The carrots were in a basket, and so were a few turnips. He put them in a box and looked around for onions. He couldn't see a single one. He trotted back to the house. "There are no onions at all," he said. "Rubbish," said Mrs. Twiddle. "There are heaps. Go back and look again, Twiddle." So Mr. Twiddle went back and looked again, but still he couldn't see any onions, although this time he looked up on the roof of the shed too, thinking they might be hung there. He trotted back to the house again. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Twiddle, but really and truly there's no onions there," he said. "Mr. Twiddle, you make me cross," said Mrs. Twiddle. "Why, I put the onions in the shed myself. I'll come and show you." "Really? I could have thought you knew an onion by now." Mrs. Twiddle went down to the shed with Mr. Twiddle. She looked all around, and then she stared in surprise. "How strange," she said. "How very, very strange. Not a single onion here." I know what happened. Do you? Let me know if you figured it out. I have, but I'm not going to tell you. Let's see if I'm right. They're all gone. You haven't been eating them, Twiddle, have you? "Of course not," said Mr. Twiddle, offended. "I don't eat raw onions. Whereabouts did you put them?" "In the corner," Mrs. Twiddle pointing. "And they were there yesterday, a whole heap of them. Wherever can they have gone to?" I know. Do you? Mr. Twiddle stared at the corner where his wife was pointing, and a horrid cold feeling came over him. There had been something in that corner this morning, and he had planted it. Dozens and dozens and dozens. "What are you looking for like that, Mr. Twiddle?" asked Mrs. Twiddle, staring at him. "Have you done something to my onions?" "Nothing very much, dear," said Mrs. Twiddle, trying to smile. I just planted them all, that's all." "Planted them?" Oh, Mr. Twiddle. Said Mrs. Twiddle in the greatest surprise. "What did you want to plant onions for? You helped me yourself to pull them up out of the ground in the autumn. Why did you plant them again?" "I thought they were bulbs," said Mr. Twiddle. "Well, they are bulbs," said Mrs. Twiddle, "but they're not the sort to plant in the garden." "I thought they were daffodils," said poor Mr. Twiddle. "I've been very, very, very hard at work all morning planting them in a neat rows. I thought it would be such a surprise for you." "Well, it certainly is a surprise," said Mrs. Twiddle. "And now, Twiddle, I'm afraid if you want any onions in your stew for dinner, you'll have to do some more hard work and dig up those onions again." I figured it out. Yeah, I knew that's what he did. Poor Mr. Twiddle. He sadly took up his spade and dug up the dozens and dozens and dozens of onions he had to so carefully plant it this morning. And wasn't he hungry when he finished? "I could eat 2 whole stews. I declare," he said to Mrs. Twiddle when he went in. There was a beautiful stew for him, and he did enjoy it. "I'm sorry you had your work all for nothing, Twiddle," said Mrs. Twiddle as she gave him the 4th helping of stew. 4th helping? Wow! "But my dear man, do try to think what you're doing in the future." "Oh, I will, Mrs. Twiddle, I will," said Mr. Twiddle, picking up the sugar sifter and shaking sugar all over his stew instead of the pepper. "Oh, Mr. Twiddle, I've quite made up my mind about that." And he stirred his lemonade with the salt spoon, smiling all over his funny old face. You can just stop him from doing things like that? Can you? Can you just stop him? Well, we're going into the 6th chapter for next week. I hope you all enjoyed Mr. Twiddle. Boy, I'll tell you what, if I was married to this man, I wouldn't have any hair. We'd have to have a lot of one-on-one. So I hope you enjoyed the story. We will see you tomorrow for Grammy's DT meals and more. And there's going to be some changes, so be looking for that. Have a great day. God bless. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye now.